Hi, welcome to the Unbuckled book review of all of the Marvels. This is the paperback version by Douglas Wolk. There is also a hardback version that looks very nice. I assume, exactly the same. 370 pages, and it's from profilebooks.com. Now, this book came out in 2021 and features 1961 to 2017, basically. I don't think it features anything sort of beyond that. There's certain cut-off points, and really goes from Fantastic Four #1. It does bounce all over the place, so it's not like one sort of starts Fantastic Four #1 and then works all the way through. It does have, and let's go for a quick flick, you can see not a huge amount of pictures. Obviously some panels, etc., some covers, etc., but not a huge amount. It does, of course, even when I say to Fantastic Four #1, it does actually have a picture there of Captain America punches Hitler, and it's talking about, obviously, politics. It had politics all the way from the start. There's always references to things, and you can look at many things and think, oh, that's probably the reason why they were including that. Vietnam stories, all those sort of things were included all the way through. I must admit, one thing it doesn't mention here is one of the reasons I don't like comics as much. I mean, I love comics. I still love reading all the comics. But many of the comics, compared with what they were like back in the 60s and 70s, one, I grew up. That was the time when I grew up reading them. So obviously I have affinity for those. And I understand people who bought comics in 2010, 2015 will love those because that's the comics they started with. It's always going to be the case, I suspect. But I just don't like the excessive use of ink. That sounds stupid. But for me, lots of the comics are very dark. I prefer comics that have less ink. That's just me. I just prefer a more. That's why whenever if they do one that's like a pencil drawing one, a comic that's done pencil, I love those sort of ones because I think sometimes it's just some of the comics are just so much dark black ink that it's just dark all the time. That's probably why I never like Batman. It's just all those Dark Knight stories, all just too grim and dark, and that's my thing. But it never mentions that one. It mentions lots of things about Spider-Man, Reed Richards. Jean Grey would never say do. Of course they would. Every writer that comes along will write different things. They will have certain words and ways of saying things. I'm certain they will not say the things that they said back in the 60s because, of course, the writers will have a completely different way of writing. No one would say it in a way that was very clunkily done sometimes back then. Bah! You know, he mentions bah quite a lot of times. I mean, does anyone say bah anymore in comics? They might do. But it's also other things that he mentions about legacy characters, also Amazing Spider-Man #1, issue 1, constantly coming out. And it's quite good. It's mentions about legacy numbers. I hadn't realised, and this is the thing I bought this book for, lots of information about things like here about leaping directly from issue 32 to issue 789. Lucky someone kept track of all those issues. But 789, that's a lot of issues. So it's going to change. To be that Peter Parker would be still speaking in the same way or still have the same ideas would be rather depressing all the way through that time. I mean, I can't imagine what I thought when I was 15 would be the same as when I'm 60 or beyond. Anyway, so unlikely, you know, but it's still, if I like the character, do I have to read everything to understand? Of course not. I don't think so. But it's just good points, and it's nice to put these sort of things out. And of course, everyone will have different opinions. Everyone will have different opinions about these things. About characters, I mean, I'm the worst for this. About characters who were killed. I never worry about it. It doesn't worry me because I always think, well, maybe it's another universe or something. I mean, that's the thing, that like multiple universes, you can have like everything. But sometimes I get to the point where I think, is what's his name dead or alive still? I don't know. I've lost track sometimes. I had to go and look on Wikipedia, and you can read the long list of all things. And then, of course, it does show all the different universes, and that, oh, they might have died there. That's the reason why I thought they would. So, what's a comic fan? Do I count as one? Yeah, I think I'm a comic fan. But it doesn't mean I don't read other things as well. I mean, of course, I read vast amounts of other things. I'm not going to just read just comics. I love comics. I've grown up with comics. I still will love comics. And, yeah, read them. However, there's no start point, really. Because, of course, it picks Fantastic Four #1. But you could argue that the origin goes beyond that. Of course, Sergeant Fury, you would have the stories where obviously Reed Richards meets Sergeant Fury, all those sort of characters. So probably you could say the origins of the Fantastic Four and Marvel Universe was Second World War. I don't think you could stretch it further back. But even that's a bit of a retrofitting, because of course there's no mention of them back in the Golden Age comics. So and a lot of the Golden Age comics, of course, disappeared. Many of the characters like Vision back then. Now we've got a different Vision, but the Vision back then, obviously, and another guy, Black Widow, completely different Black Widow. I don't know if she even turns up now. I think she was in the 12, but that's about it. I love this one. That was a classic, though. I guess, you know, now, of course, everyone could probably knock it up in Photoshop in about 5 seconds. But then it was amazing. And it just, I remember looking at that thinking, wow, that was just incredible. Fantastic Four annual #1. Now, it doesn't mention every comic. It does say on the cover, 27,000. I don't think it would be possible to, well, you could read all 27,000. I certainly did. I'm not going to, because you could, every 15 minutes, you could read a comic, take 2 years. 10 hours a day, you could read 27,000 comics. But it doesn't include all 27,000 comics. There's no mention, I don't think, and I might be stand corrected on that, like Leapfrog's appearance in Daredevil or whatever. Hyde and Cobra. I don't think they're mentioned. And there's loads of the Tomorrow Man. I don't know, maybe he's in here somewhere. Kang might be mentioned. I'm certain Kang's mentioned. That would be weird. Ramatut, they are mentioned. Scarlet Centurion. So there's all those sort of... And you've got here, of course, Doctor Doom. That was one of my favourites. Fantastic. And he does mention quite a few of my favourite annuals, though I was never a super fan of that, but that is quite a central one. The Fantastic Four annual #6. And he does, which I think is very good. It's good to have. Otherwise, that would be very confusing if he didn't include the dates. Because he does put November 1968. Because sometimes, of course, you've got now Amazing Spider-Man 1, all multiple copies. You start thinking, which one are we talking about? And I always got slightly annoyed with that. I always thought they should have done volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They did that in the Golden Age. They had volume number with the comic. Why didn't they go with volume numbers in here? Because you go to comic conventions and it's virtually impossible to find some comics because they're in boxes and you're looking going, Fantastic Four number whatever, and you just run through the boxes. And it could be in any of the boxes because of the naming conventions have just made it so hard to find. Obviously, if you're buying them at the time, it's easier. But he mentions lots and lots of things here. And you've got, of course, here, the first issues of Tales of Suspense, Tales to Astonish, join the Journey into Mystery and Strange Tales. And, of course, it mentions, like, say, monsters. So monsters are quite a central character. And many, of course, the monsters that appeared were just throwaway monsters. Obviously, Groot, etc. Grot, I always Groot. However, but there was loads of other ones. And they had, of course, prototypes as well, though I'm always a bit sceptical about the prototypes. I mean, you've got things like the mask is very similar. Was it the fact that they were going to use it later? Possibly. But he sort of mentions these sort of things in here, actually, like Electro. And things, of course, some of these characters, Spore, the thing that could not die. But, of course, the thing, of course, did turn up. He held the world in his iron grip. Rombu. Some did turn up. Of course, there were some monster books later on that mentioned them, but they never were central to the sort of Marvel universe particularly. So Electro, etc. Obviously the names, but again, why not? You've got Electro was used, of course, back in the 50s with the Captain America story. So, but it does mention these sort of things. Spider-Man Tangled Web 14, and it's quite nice to get. Again, it's fascinating. You think, you know what? I'm just going to go out and look for that, get the trade paperback, or maybe a Marvel Masterworks or an Omnibus edition. And a few of them I have been thinking about. Actually, that's some area in here again doesn't get mentioned. Kazar. Whoops. So, you know, there's loads and loads of those that are not mentioned. Does mention Master of Kung Fu. That gets quite a lot of mention, which is nice because I really enjoyed Master. Though, why they never completed the Epic collections. They got, I think, Volume 2, and then Volume 3 was going to come out. Nothing since. Maybe, I thought after the film, I thought maybe they would have completed some 2 or 3, because it required 2 or 3 more volumes. Plus there's all the black and white ones as well, wasn't there? I think there was. I didn't read them. But there was loads and loads of Master of Kung Fu. And so it mentions those. The Vietnam years, so that came, of course, the politics and things. Obviously, X-Men, it's got mentions here. But there's gaps. It's not like, say, you've got here X-Men 101. Doesn't have mentioned 102, 103. So it's not it's actually quite hot today, so it's quite slippery for some reason. This book is slightly slipping. I've already dented it slightly just by dropping it just then. However, it does mention quite a bit, and my favourite one, I love that one, Bizarre Adventures #27. That was a real good one because it had 3 stories. Nightcrawler, as well as Iceman, and also, of course, Phoenix. Good, great little stories. X-Men #3. Is that, oh, that's 1991, so I was just suddenly thinking, is that a Blob story? No, it's not. It's the 1991. I love this section about Walter Simonson as well. That's a really good section. Talks a lot about that. Actually, that's one volume I have still got to read. It's been on my pile. You can see it just behind me. The Mighty Thor Omnibus. I really must read that. I love those comics when they came out. So it's just great to read a lot of the comics. And actually some interesting information that I didn't realise. And that's the thing about this book, which I've really, really loved. It gives a little bit of background detail about things that I hadn't thought about. I mean, why would I? Unless I've been following all the fanzines, all the news, etc. I don't go every single detail about this, but it's just fascinating. I love the bit of doom, etc. there. However, also you've got here about the cinematic universe. Of course, it's different from the, and it mentions that it is different. It's going to be different, and there's lots of things. I thoroughly enjoyed most of them. Yeah, there's things where I look and go, really? There were better stories in the original, but they're going to change it. Hollywood is always going to change it. There's things that probably don't work. And it's, you know, like Miss Marvel. I love Miss Marvel. It was great. Apparently it didn't do very well. I don't know. That's what the comment apparently it wasn't. I thought it was great. I loved it. And I'm looking forward to the She-Hulk. So that will be good. Again, I love the She-Hulk books, comics. They'll probably change it. But if it's similar to the one that was recently in a complete collection, I love that. That was good. That was really good. And he's got here about Black Panther. And again, lots of information about Black Panther I never realised as well. So again, some areas to explore. And that's the thing about this book. I think it's just going to be a great one, like Jungle Action 6, which I just got in the Penguin Classic one, which was superb. So it's great comments there. Jungle Action 10. But again, you can see there's gaps there. But there's also lots of other stories, just a lot of background detail about Black Panther. Again, it covers certain bits. Now, I don't think, like I said, Daredevil, I don't have to say, Daredevil doesn't really, and I'm just flicking through it very quickly again, just to go through it. I don't recall seeing much about, no. Well, so there's definitely big gaps. Daredevil does not have much of anything. If you're a Daredevil fan, you're going to come to this thinking, what about all the Electro stories and Kingpin and all those quite central characters? Still, you've got Iron Man, Thunderbolts, and again, Thunderbolts, one that I've never read, so it's just great to find out all the various things, and also about lots of things like here, Marvel Collector's Edition 1, a comic giveaway given away to buyers of the Candy Charleston shoe. Well, obviously, I've never heard of that. Anyway, so that's just the Thunderbolts 10, Uncanny X-Men, and Dark Avengers. Again, that's the thing that wasn't, again, when I said about the inking. It was just the darkness of the inking, not the story. That never worries me, but the story's dark, where I can read very dark comics and things, but it's just, I always found, I just find it very cluttered, dark inking, to my mind. And I do see comics more as a visual thing than sometimes as written. So I always come to it and I want it to be a bit more, anyway. And also the panel structure is different. I prefer the panel structure as it was in the 60s and 70s. Personally, I prefer that. If I was creating vast numbers of comics, that would be the way I'd do it, 60s and 70s style. Probably no one likes that now. You know, variant covers and things. I'm not a fan of those either. But, you know, each their own. And it does mention things like Osborn. See, again, those Osborn. So I never liked Norman Osborn. I have to say, just really the Dark Reign, that one, that just did not. So it's interesting to read, and you think, you know what, maybe I will give it another go and have a look at some of these ones. Interlude, what's it? This one, March 1965. Yeah, you got here the X-Men 11, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver quit Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The thing is, it always mentions Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but I don't think they ever called themselves that. They saw themselves that. I think they called themselves the Brotherhood of Mutants. I can't imagine they would go around and say, oh, we're the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. I don't think Magneto saw himself as evil. He saw himself as the good guy. That everyone else was the evil getting in the way of the, you know. So it's, I love this one here. Marvel titles promoted one another too. Uncanny marketing and far-sighted storytelling. Mighty Marvel checklist. I loved the Marvel checklist, and it mentions all about that. I wish they would bring out a book of all those, because I just always enjoyed thumbing through those. And it's got loads of, obviously, all the thing, the Great Destroyer. What's this one? 1965. Infinity Gauntlet. Oh, of course, it goes on to Thanos story. And, of course, goes through. But again, at this point, lots of the storyline 2014, 2015. So it does, it's a lot of 2000-ish more than earlier, I have to say, which is a slight pity. I prefer the earlier period, but there's some great stories told later, 2014, 2000, and this again gives an opportunity for sort of going through it and you think, you know what, I will give that a go. I will go and buy that book or whatever, you know, trade paperback. Maybe try and pick the comic up, a bit trickier other than going to comic marts and picking them up. Secret Wars, I enjoyed that. Strange Tales, 146, talking about Dormammu. However he said, I don't know how it's Dormammu. Of course, it's an alien dimension. Maybe there's no way that he probably says it completely different. I'm not going to argue with him, whatever he says. If he says it's something else, I agree with him. What If 32. But it does have a lovely section on Linda Carter. And I must admit, I've got a couple of Linda Carter stories. I've also got the Night Nurse 1-4 in a special edition. I haven't got the action. I did have it one time. I wish I never got rid of them, but that's always the way. But Linda Carter, she turned up quite a bit after that. Certainly the earlier Linda Carters, great little stories. And if you've been recently getting the I think the 1961 Omnibus and the 62 Omnibus, they feature some stories of Linda Carter. They really should bring out a complete collection of Linda Carter stories. Why not? I can't imagine anyone's going to buy them, other than probably me. But I would, yeah. Miss Marvel, issue 6. I love those stories. They were great. Fantastic Four 48. And as it says here, this book was an unusual one because it was. And it points out, of course, the Galactus trilogy is corny, etc., etc. And I agree. It's one of those things, it's a classic story. It's an amazing story. It's a powerful story. And yet, it starts halfway through the story and ends weirdly in this. It's sort of just like somehow fitting slightly odd. I suppose it's like some of the old Victorian storytelling ones where you literally have like a literal long, and this is the way he describes it, as if this story is just one long, literally, because they, back in the Victorian times, they would write zillions of words for a story, just forever. Every variation you could imagine. No, I don't think anyone would buy that. But you do, because you get it in the comic book. That's basically what it is. It's just a continuous, it's a soap opera of these characters which you're willing to dedicate, which is great. I love it. More they come out. But of course, it is just, that story always slightly weird. Galactus is always odd, but still. And I love the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, so he even mentions that. I love those ones. Doesn't actually, there's briefest mention about Steve Ditko about that, of course. Yeah, another great character, Steve Ditko. He created so many great characters. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. It was a bit of a laughing stock, apparently. I didn't realise that. I must admit, I always thought she was a great character. But obviously, I was wrong on that. But however, it does have quite a nice little section about Squirrel Girl. And also then goes to the end, talking about, obviously, his family and reading the comic books and all those sort of things, which is just interesting as well. It's really a good sort of a story, etc. It's brilliant. I loved it. I must admit, I haven't read all of it. I haven't read all 27,000 comics either, because of course you can read a considerable number if you get the Marvel Unlimited, though annoyingly slightly, I must do a review of that as well at some point. There are so many gaps in that just baffle. Quite often when you go to it, I think, oh, you know, especially when you get a book like this and you think, oh, I must read that. And that comic is not there. Oh, that's another thing it doesn't mention, of course, the Star Wars. Of course, there's zillions of Star Wars on the Marvel Unlimited, but it's not a superhero comic. I've always felt the Star Wars one should, no, that would be pushing it too far. Suddenly Doom turns up in Star Wars. That would, so I think there must be a sort of no-no on that. It's like we'd having Donald Duck turn up in the superhero comics. Technically they could. I don't think the fans would really go with that. Donald Duck suddenly became a Marvel sort of, I don't know, Super Duck. No, they probably wouldn't do that. That's probably been done before. Hyper Duck. Maybe not. No. Of course they've had Daffy Duck. No. Dippy Duck. There was Diffy Duck, I think. Was that a Marvel character? It was back in, maybe I think in the 50s. However, you got all those sort of things. But it does mention lots of great stuff. And I loved it. So, do I recommend this? Yes. I definitely do. Will you agree with it? Probably not. You might really not like lots of the comments. You might be disappointed it doesn't mention everything, because that's, in a sense, the trouble with this is that it does give that sort of idea that it's going to mention, oh, how could they do that? It's just not possible. Unless they had the tiniest of print, the typeface would have to be like, 2 or 3 point. I could read that just about, I suspect. Magnifying glass maybe. But you could have that and maybe have like 700, 800 page book, really fine paper. And you could probably have every single story. But it would be mind-numbingly dull book, I'm certain. And it wouldn't give you a feeling of the direction of, and it does give at least a feel of the flow of the thing, because as it says, there's no start point. Was it Reed Richards, Fantastic Four #1, or was it? And then you got Ben and May, etc. All those they had a story before. The mother and father of Spidey had a backstory as well with Red Skull, etc., etc., and so on. Where do you draw lines of where? Do you draw a line of the westerns where you go back all the way to the Western period? I think that's really stretching it. But then again, you had, was it Two Gun Kid? One of them came into, obviously with Hawkeye and the Avengers for quite a period of time. And so you've got lots of different stories. Marvel Universe, and it's a lot of that sort of stuff. And also into the future. They don't do enough of that. I always feel that that's one area that Marvel has completely, utterly ignored, which is baffling to me. And that it doesn't, I don't think he mentions that in here. There is no mention. I mean, you got Kang. And that's obviously really the future. But there's no, unless I'm completely talking rubbish, which is possible, is that there's no sort of future. Please put in the comments below. Future ones, like legions of superheroes. There is nothing like that, like set 3 or 4, 10, 20, 30,000 years in the future in the Marvel Universe with lots and lots of superheroes that, be very completely different, who come back and, into our thing. They've never really done that, which I think is a pity. I would have loved that storyline. I mean, there is obviously the Marvel 2099 or whatever it was series, which I bought a few of, but I didn't buy them. But it still felt like it was still basically Marvel of this period to me, most of the time. It didn't really feel like the way that Legion superheroes. But anyway, that's a mere quibble. But it's really brought up lots of different things and thinking about the comics. And I like that in the book. I've got other books that are very similar that sort of discuss the Marvel storyline, and it does sort of think, oh, why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do, certain things? Why did they split up? Obviously, they split the comic books up, but they could have done that in lots of other places. They did it with Thor. He mentions that. And it's the Tales of Asgard bits where he mentioned Tales of Asgard. And I love those Tales of Asgard stories. And it's got, there was a lot of background. So Jack Kirby really stretched that Asgardian storyline, but really obviously cut back on the actual main story. But they could have done that in all the others. They could have had the Fantastic Four, could have had literally 10 pages Fantastic Four story, and they could have done a Sue Storm story at the back. Or they could have had other characters, which they could have introduced. And they could have alternated the thing. Why did they keep Giant Man and the Hulk, etc. in Tales to Astonish? Why didn't they intersperse it with other characters who could have had short stories or whatever? Or maybe the supervillains could have had a little bit backstory. There was literally could have been infinite amount of variations on stories. They could have come out with anthology titles that include, certainly after 68, when they were allowed to have more, they could have had a load more storylines with, because they had quite a 3,000 or 4,000 different characters that they could have really explored, turned many of the characters who are villains into heroes, and maybe heroes into villains. They could have done a lot more of that. But anyway, it just brings up lots of thoughts about why they did certain things, creativity, and how and why sometimes the form gets trapped in a particular way. Because of course you can't stretch it too far. There's a point where if the sales go down, people will get confused with the thing, and loads of different things. I'm certain there are lots of book reasons why they didn't do all these things that I think, oh, it would be brilliant if they had, but it doesn't mean that they would or should. Obviously, Martin Goodman probably turned around and would have thrown me out the door, said, get out, come out with stupid ideas, you've ruined my business, kind of thing. I'm certain he would have said that. But so, but I would have thought lots of things. But this is what this book is good. It just gives you a lot to think about, all things. And if that's, I think that is worth, and let's see, it's £9.99 on the back. And you probably can get it cheaper, second hand, etc., etc. If a book brings that up, brings a lot of things to think about, I think that's good, because it means you go off and think about lots of other things, about other stuff as well. So all of the Marvels, totally recommended. Certainly, I think it's brilliant. I think it's possibly one that you might disagree with lots of the comments as well. Bye.